They tried to prove their mother was insane to steal her fortune. They forgot she was a judge. When my son and his wife sat across the polished table in my lawyer's office, they saw the confused old woman from their secretly recorded, maliciously edited videos. They had no idea I'd already seen every frame of their lies and was about to present my own evidence in a case they never knew was being built. They came to a meeting, I came to a sentencing. Retirement for former Judge Martha Vance was not an ending, but a change in jurisdiction. Her authority now governed a domain of quiet, meticulously ordered days within the solid brick walls of a house that had been her home for 40 years. At 68, her mind remained a courtroom where sloppy arguments were dismissed and evidence was weighed with an unforgiving precision. The grief for her husband, Richard, was the one disorderly element, a persistent ache she managed with the same structured discipline she applied to everything else. It was filed away, not forgotten, a closed case whose verdict was a life sentence of solitude. Her study was a testament to a life lived by precedent and logic. Leather-bound volumes of case law stood shoulder to shoulder with works of philosophy and history, their spines forming a bulwark against the untidiness of the world. This afternoon, sunlight streamed through the tall windows, illuminating the fine layer of dust on a stack of journals she had yet to archive. Martha sat at Richard's mahogany desk, a fountain pen moving with practiced grace across a sheet of heavy cream paper as she deconstructed a particularly thorny constitutional argument from a recent Supreme Court dissent. There was a profound satisfaction in the act, the intellectual rigor, the familiar scratch of nib on paper, the silent debate with minds long dead or far away. It was a ritual that fortified her against the encroaching silence. The doorbell chimed at precisely 4 o'clock, as it did every Sunday. Punctuality was a virtue Kevin had inherited, or at least one his wife, Jessica, diligently enforced. Martha capped her pen and rose, her posture as straight and uncompromising as it had been on the bench. She met them at the door, her son's familiar face softening into a smile as he leaned in to kiss her cheek. "Mother," Kevin said, his voice warm, "you look well." "I am well," she replied, her tone neutral. She turned her attention to Jessica, who was already stepping inside, her presence filling the grand foyer with the scent of expensive perfume. "Martha, the garden looks absolutely stunning," Jessica gushed, her eyes bright and assessing as they swept over the entrance hall. "You must tell me your secret with the hydrangeas." The compliment, like all of Jessica's compliments, felt both perfectly polished and utterly impersonal. Martha offered a small, polite smile. The secret was a disciplined application of aluminum sulfate to the soil, a matter of chemistry, not magic. They settled in the living room, a space of tasteful antiques and deep, comfortable armchairs. The conversation followed its usual Sunday script: polite inquiries about her week, a brief summary of their own busy lives, charity galas, networking events, the relentless demands of Kevin's career in finance. Martha listened, her gaze steady. She loved her son, but she saw him now through a lens of almost academic observation. She saw the ambition he tried to temper with filial duty and the anxious energy that flickered behind Jessica's practiced poise. They were a handsome couple, a portrait of success, yet something about them always felt curated, as if they were performing for an unseen audience. "We brought you something," Jessica announced, producing a sleek, silver-wrapped box from her handbag. "We saw it and thought of you immediately." Inside was a modern digital photo frame, its screen dark and reflective. "It cycles through pictures," Kevin explained, taking it from the box. "We can upload new ones from our phones. That way you can see what we're up to, even when we can't be here." "How thoughtful," Martha said, the words tasting of formality. She disliked the intrusion of unnecessary technology into her home, but she recognized the gesture for what it was meant to be, an offering, a bridge across the generational and emotional distance that had quietly widened since Richard's death. "I'll set it up for you," Kevin offered, already looking for a suitable outlet near the mantelpiece. "It's simple, really. Just needs Wi-Fi." As they prepared to leave an hour later, Jessica paused in the foyer, her hand resting on the heavy oak door. "This old house has such character, Martha," she said, her gaze lingering on the ornate, original deadbolt. "It must be so comforting to feel this secure." The observation hung in the air for a moment, an odd note in their symphony of pleasantries. Martha simply nodded, watching from the doorway as her son and his wife walked down the stone path to their car, a united front against the world. She closed the door, the heavy lock clicking into place with a sound of finality, and for the first time that day, she felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. The following Sunday, the aroma of roast chicken and thyme filled the dining room. Dinner was an exercise in practiced civility, the conversation flowing over familiar, shallow channels. On the mantelpiece in the adjoining living room, the digital frame Kevin had installed glowed softly, cycling through a curated slideshow of his and Jessica's life, a ski trip in Aspen, a smiling selfie at a black tie event, a candid shot of them laughing on a sailboat. Each image was a perfect, silent testament to their happiness. It was over dessert, a lemon tart Martha had prepared, that the tone shifted. Jessica placed her fork down with delicate precision, her gaze meeting Martha's across the polished mahogany table. "Martha," she began, her voice imbued with a carefully measured seriousness, "Kevin has been working on something truly extraordinary. We wanted to talk to you about it before we approach anyone else." Kevin took his cue, straightening in his chair. He produced a slim tablet from his briefcase, the screen flaring to life with a slick corporate logo. "It's a medical technology venture, Mother. Predictive diagnostics. We're using machine learning to analyze genetic markers and identify high-risk indicators for degenerative neurological diseases years, even decades, before the first symptoms appear." He navigated the presentation with a smooth, well-rehearsed confidence. Graphs illustrating market potential bloomed on the screen, followed by projections of staggering revenue streams. The language was a tapestry of impressive buzzwords, proprietary algorithms, scalable platforms, paradigm-shifting potential. It was a flawless performance, professional and compelling. Martha listened without interruption, her expression unreadable, her hands resting motionless in her lap. "The potential to save lives is immense," Kevin continued, his voice resonating with passion. "But more than that—" He paused, glancing at Jessica before looking back at his mother. "It's a chance to build something that lasts. Something with our family's name on it." Jessica leaned forward, her eyes earnest. "Richard would have been so proud, Martha. A Vance legacy rooted in innovation and helping people. This isn't just an investment for us. It's about building a future." The emotional appeal was delivered with the precision of a surgical strike. It was designed to bypass logic, to appeal to a widow's sentiment and a mother's pride. For a long moment, the only sound was the quiet hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. Martha finally picked up her fork, taking a small, deliberate bite of tart. "The market analysis is aggressive," she stated, her voice calm and even. "Your primary competitor, Biogen Dynamics, has a 3-year head start and significant institutional backing. How do you intend to overcome that barrier to entry?" Kevin seemed momentarily taken aback by the shift from legacy to logistics. "Our algorithm is more advanced." He recovered quickly. "More accurate. We have provisional patents filed." "Provisional patents are not issued patents," Martha countered gently. "Who is your intellectual property counsel? And what is the equity structure for the core development team? Are they on a vesting schedule?" The questions came one after another, each one precise and targeted, stripping away the presentation's glossy veneer to expose the raw mechanics beneath. She inquired about their cash burn rate, their customer acquisition strategy, their regulatory approval timeline. This was not the conversation of a doting mother being offered a chance at a legacy. It was the cross-examination of a witness whose testimony had revealed potential inconsistencies. The confidence in Kevin's face began to waver, replaced by a flicker of frustration. Jessica's practiced smile tightened at the edges. They had come prepared for a pitch, not an inquest. "Mother, these are details," Kevin said, a hint of exasperation in his tone. "What we need now is the foundational capital to move forward. $2 million. The number landed on the table, stark and immense. Martha met her son's gaze, her own unwavering. "That is a substantial sum," she said. She pushed her dessert plate aside, the gesture signaling the end of the discussion. "You've clearly put a great deal of work into this. It's an impeccable pitch." She rose from her chair. "Leave the full business plan and the prospectus with me. I will review them thoroughly." Kevin and Jessica exchanged a glance, a micro-expression of shared disappointment that they failed to completely conceal. They had hoped for an emotional decision, a swift agreement fueled by family loyalty. Instead, they had received a judicial deferment. "Of course, Mother," Kevin said, his voice strained with forced pleasantry. "Take all the time you need." Martha knew, with the chilling certainty of a verdict delivered, that she had just denied them something they had desperately counted on receiving today. For 3 days, Martha's study transformed into a war room. The glossy prospectus and detailed business plan from her son were splayed across the mahogany desk, dissected and marked up with her sharp, decisive annotations in red ink. She cross-referenced market data, researched the principles of the development team they cited, and ran financial models on her own computer, her fingers moving across the keyboard with an efficiency that belied her age. She was not merely reading, she was conducting due diligence with the same methodical intensity she had once applied to a complex criminal appeal. The emotional plea for a Vance legacy was set aside like inadmissible hearsay. Only the facts remained. On the 4th day, she called them. Not for dinner, but for a meeting. "Be here at 2 o'clock, she had said, her tone leaving no room for negotiation. When Kevin and Jessica arrived, she did not lead them to the comfortable armchairs of the living room. She received them in her study, the heart of her intellectual fortress. The documents, now neatly stacked, sat in the center of the desk between them, a silent testament to her scrutiny. "I have reviewed your proposal," Martha began, her voice cutting through the expectant silence. She looked directly at her son. "The concept has merit. I will provide the capital." A wave of palpable relief washed over them. Kevin's shoulders, which had been tense, visibly relaxed. Jessica's carefully composed face broke into a genuine, radiant smile. "Oh, Mother, that's wonderful news," Kevin said, his voice thick with emotion. "You won't regret this. This is going to change everything." "I'm sure it will," Martha agreed evenly. "However," she continued, the single word shifting the entire gravity of the room, "let's be clear about the terms. This will not be an investment, nor will it be a gift. It will be a formal, secured loan." The smiles on their faces faltered. "The principal will be $2 million, extended at a prime plus 2 interest rate, amortized over 10 years, Martha stated, her voice as dispassionate as if she were reading a verdict. "The loan will be collateralized, fully, by your personal assets, your house, your brokerage accounts, everything." Kevin's mouth opened slightly, a protest forming, but no sound came out. Jessica's smile had vanished, replaced by a mask of stunned disbelief. They had come expecting a blank check from a benevolent matriarch and were instead being presented with the unyielding terms of a corporate lender. Furthermore, Martha went on, her gaze sweeping over them both, the funds will not be dispersed as a lump sum. They will be released in tranches, contingent upon the successful and verifiable completion of predetermined milestones. She gestured to a single sheet of paper she had typed herself. Phase 1, $500,000 upon the incorporation of the company and the finalization of the IP assignments. Phase 2, $750,000 upon securing the lab space and hiring a full-time lead researcher with the credentials I have specified, and so on. I will require quarterly progress reports and reserve the right to a full audit at any time. She was not offering them her money, she was asserting absolute control over it. Every dollar would be tethered to performance, every step subject to her oversight. She was removing any possibility of the capital being diverted, misused, or simply squandered. Mother, this is very formal. Kevin finally managed. The word formal, a weak substitute for the accusation he clearly wanted to make. It is a $2 million transaction, Kevin. Formality is the absolute minimum requirement, Martha replied calmly. This structure protects my capital, and it instills the financial discipline necessary for any startup to succeed. It protects you from yourselves. The final sentence was a masterstroke, framing her draconian terms as an act of maternal prudence. To argue against it would be to admit they couldn't be trusted. Jessica's face was a marvel of controlled fury, her expression a perfect, brittle mask of gratitude. The light had died in her eyes, replaced by a cold, hard gleam. They were trapped. They needed the money too desperately to refuse, but the conditions rendered their original plan, whatever it might have been, impossible. They had wanted easy access to her fortune, and instead, they were being handed a gilded cage. Of course, Jessica said, her voice a little too bright. It's perfectly sensible. We understand completely. Thank you, Martha. Kevin nodded numbly, his grand vision of a family legacy suddenly reduced to a series of performance reviews for his own mother. He signed the term sheet she presented without another word. As they left, their strained thank yous echoing in the hall, Martha remained at her desk. She had protected her assets and asserted her authority. Yet she felt no triumph. She had just engaged in a transaction with her own son, and in doing so, had tacitly acknowledged the complete and devastating absence of trust between them. The week after the loan agreement was signed, the first crack appeared in the bedrock of Martha's ordered existence. It was a small thing, almost insignificant. The executed term sheet for Kevin S. Company, which she had placed in the top left-hand drawer of her desk, its designated place for pending financial matters, was not there. Martha, who could locate a specific legal precedent from a 30-year-old case in under 5 minutes, stood before the open drawer for a full minute, a sense of profound dislocation settling over her. She conducted a systematic search, her movements precise and economical. She checked the other drawers, the stack of mail on the credenza, the briefcase she rarely used. Nothing. Finally, she found it. It was sitting on the bottom shelf of a bookcase on the far side of the room, tucked between a biography of Justice Brandeis and a treatise on maritime law. It was a place she would never have put it. For a moment, she allowed the possibility that she had simply misplaced it, an uncharacteristic lapse. She dismissed the thought. It was illogical. It was a deviation from a lifetime of ingrained habit. Then, other anomalies began to surface, like faint, dissonant notes in a familiar melody. Her smart thermostat, programmed to maintain a steady 68 degrees, would inexplicably drop the temperature to a chilly 62 in the middle of the night. The living room lights, which she always turned off before retiring, would be on when she came downstairs in the morning. Kevin, during a brief phone call to report their successful incorporation, had been quick to offer an explanation. Those systems are always getting buggy updates, Mother. It's probably just a glitch. I can take a look next time I'm over. The disruptions were subtle, easily explained away as quirks of an aging house or fickle technology. Yet they accumulated, creating a pattern of small uncertainties that pricked at the edges of her confidence. The true assault came the following Tuesday. The phone rang just after noon. It was Jessica, her voice a confection of warmth and concern. "Martha, is everything all right? I was waiting for you at the Courtyard Cafe." Martha paused, the phone cool against her ear. The Courtyard Cafe? Why? There was a slight, carefully calibrated hesitation on the other end. "For lunch. We were supposed to meet at 12. Don't you remember? We spoke about it on Sunday. You said Tuesday would be perfect." Martha's mind, a finely tuned instrument of recall, scanned its records. There had been no such conversation. She remembered every detail of their last visit, the roast chicken, the lemon tart, the impeccable pitch, the strained departure. A lunch appointment was not among them. "I have no recollection of that conversation, Jessica, and it is not in my calendar." "Oh," Jessica said, her voice softening with pity. "Well, don't you worry about it for a second. It's my fault. I should have sent a confirmation text. There's so much going on. It's easy for things to slip through the cracks." The implication was clear, your cracks, not mine. An hour later, Kevin called. The maneuver was perfectly coordinated. "Jessica told me what happened," he began, his tone heavy with manufactured worry. "Please don't feel bad, Mother. It happens to everyone." "Nothing happened, Kevin," Martha stated, her voice sharp with a precision she could not suppress. Jessica was mistaken about a lunch appointment that was never made. "Of course," he said, his placating tone more insulting than an open argument. "Listen, it's a lot to keep track of, managing the house, your finances, and now this new venture. Maybe we should start looking at ways to simplify things for you, just to take some of the pressure off." She ended the call, a cold stillness settling deep within her. This was not a series of random glitches or memory lapses. It was a coordinated campaign. The move document, the erratic thermostat, the phantom lunch appointment, viewed in isolation, they were nothing. But presented together, they formed a coherent narrative, an opening argument in a case she hadn't realized was being brought against her. They were planting seeds of doubt, not just in her mind, but for a future audience. They weren't just suggesting she was forgetful, they were meticulously building a record of it. The coordinated offensive resumed the following weekend. The pretense of a social call had been all but abandoned. This was a strategic deployment. They sat in the living room, the digital photo frame on the mantel silently flashing images of a life Martha was beginning to see as a work of fiction. Kevin began, adopting the somber tone of a man delivering difficult but necessary news. "Mother, we've been talking," he said, the we a solid wall she was meant to stand on the other side of. "With the new loan structure and the quarterly reports, it's a lot to manage. We're worried you might be feeling overwhelmed." "I am not overwhelmed, Kevin. I designed the structure. I am familiar with its demands," Martha replied, her voice level. She refused to engage with the premise of his concern. Of course," he said quickly, a gesture of concession that was anything but. "It's just your portfolio is complex. It always has been. And with everything else on your plate, it might be prudent to have another set of eyes on it." He leaned forward, his expression a careful blend of deference and authority. "Jessica has a very good friend from her university days, Mark Jennings. He's a top-tier financial advisor, specializes in estate management for families like ours. We thought perhaps just an introductory meeting to help ease the burden." It was a direct attempt to insert their own agent into the heart of her financial sovereignty. An advisor of their choosing would have access to her assets, her transactions, her net worth. It was a reconnaissance mission disguised as a helping hand. "My finances are, and will continue to be, managed by the firm Richard and I selected 30 years ago. Martha stated, her tone glacial. "I have no need for another set of eyes. The matter is closed." Her refusal was a solid, immovable object. Kevin fell silent, his line of attack exhausted. Jessica, ever the strategist, immediately opened a new front. Her approach was softer, laced with an insidious gentleness. "Martha, we're not trying to interfere," she said, her voice a soft murmur. "It's just we worry. After the mix-up with our lunch, and well, you mentioned the other day you'd misplaced an important document, didn't you?" She let the question hang in the air, a piece of evidence she was now formally entering into the record. "It just makes us think," Jessica continued, her gaze full of manufactured empathy. "It might be wise to be proactive. So many of our friends' parents are doing it now. Just a simple baseline cognitive assessment to make sure everything is functioning as it should." The suggestion was so audacious, so clinically cruel, that for a moment Martha felt the air leave her lungs. They were no longer merely suggesting she was forgetful, they were proposing to have her professionally certified as mentally unfit. "We wouldn't want you to go to just anyone," Jessica added, the final, damning piece of her testimony. "I took the liberty of looking into the top neurologist in the state. There's a Dr. Albright who has a phenomenal reputation. Her office is just 20 minutes from here." The premeditation was breathtaking. They hadn't just had a passing thought, they had researched and selected the instrument of her potential undoing. The phantom lunch, the misplaced papers, they were not isolated incidents. They were exhibits A and B in a meticulously constructed case for her incompetence. And this was the motion for a court-ordered evaluation. Martha looked from her son's anxious face to her daughter-in-law's compassionate mask. The unease that had been a faint whisper in the back of her mind was now a deafening roar. She saw their strategy laid bare discredit her mind, declare her incapable, and petition to control the fortune she had so carefully locked away from them. This was not about concern. This was about jurisdiction. She offered them a thin, inscrutable smile. "A cognitive assessment," she repeated softly, as if savoring a novel legal theory. "Thank you both for your calculated concern." She let the words hang in the air. "I will certainly take it under advisement." The next move in their silent chess match was a direct assault on her financial fortress. It came on a Wednesday morning. Martha sat at her desk to execute a routine transfer between accounts, a task she performed with the same unthinking efficiency as brewing her morning coffee. She navigated to her bank's online portal, her fingers tapping in the familiar sequence of her username and password. "Access denied. The credentials you entered are incorrect." Martha frowned. She re-entered the information, slowly this time, each keystroke deliberate. She had used this password for years, a complex alphanumeric string tied to a significant case from her early career. Unforgettable for her. Access denied. A third attempt triggered a security lockout. A cold, sharp clarity pierced through her initial flicker of self-doubt. Her password had not been forgotten, it had been changed. The wall had been breached. The objective was no longer subtle persuasion, it was now active interference. She considered her options. She could call the bank's fraud department, a logical but potentially messy step that would create an official record. Or she could use this. She could allow the opposing counsel to overplay their hand. She chose the latter. Martha picked up her phone and called her son. She made her voice sound frail, tinged with a confusion she did not feel. "Kevin," she began, "I'm having some trouble with the computer. I can't seem to log into my bank account. It keeps telling me my password is wrong, but I know it's not." The concern in his voice was immediate and just a little too smooth. "Don't worry, Mother. It's probably another one of those system updates. They can be tricky. I can stop by on my way home from the office and take a look for you." His convenience was damning. He arrived 2 hours later, carrying his briefcase and an air of competent filial concern. He followed her into the study, the scene of their last financial negotiation. "Let's see what's going on," he said, pulling up the chair beside her at the desk. Martha watched him, not as a mother, but as a judge observing a person of interest. Her gaze was analytical, her focus absolute. She watched his hands on the keyboard. "It says you're locked out," he murmured, stating the obvious. "Well, just have to go through the password reset process." He clicked the forgot password link. The system prompted for a security question. "What was the name of your first pet?" "Fluffy," Martha said. It was a lie. Her first pet was a beagle named Watson, a detail Kevin, a son who had supposedly grown up with her stories, should have known. Kevin typed Fluffy without a moment's hesitation. The system accepted it. A new screen appeared, prompting for a new password. The security question had been changed as well. This was the moment her suspicion crystallized into an undeniable fact. He was not troubleshooting a problem, he was reversing a process he himself had initiated. His movements were too swift, too certain. There was no fumbling, no exploratory clicking. He navigated the menus with an ingrained familiarity, his fingers flying across the keys not with the tentative rhythm of a helper, but with the brisk, efficient tempo of a user accessing their own account. He set a temporary password, wrote it down on a notepad for her, and then logged in successfully. The screen displayed her account balances, her private financial world laid bare. "There," he said, smiling with the satisfaction of a man who has solved a difficult puzzle. "All fixed. You should probably choose something a little easier to remember next time, Mother." He logged out, closing the browser with a flourish. His performance was flawless, but he had made a critical error. He had underestimated his audience. Martha had not just been watching his actions, she had been analyzing his methodology. He hadn't been fixing a glitch in the system. He was the glitch. "Thank you, Kevin," she said, her voice betraying none of the cold fury that was now hardening inside her. "I don't know what I would do without you." The words were a test, and his easy acceptance of them was his second mistake. He believed her. He saw only the confused, grateful mother he was trying to create, blind to the calculating jurist who was quietly taking note of every piece of damning evidence he so willingly provided. Certainty, for Martha, was not a feeling, it was a conclusion reached through the systematic elimination of all other possibilities. Kevin's performance with the computer had eliminated the possibility of coincidence. The coordinated nature of the gaslighting had eliminated the possibility of genuine concern. What remained was the chilling hypothesis of a deliberate, methodical conspiracy. A conspiracy required evidence, and evidence required a means of collection. The following morning, Martha drove into the city. She did not go to her usual shops. Instead, she found a small, nondescript electronics store in a part of town she hadn't visited in years. The kind of place that catered to private investigators and amateur radio enthusiasts. She paid in cash for a handheld RF signal detector, a device no larger than a television remote. It was a simple tool, designed to detect the radio frequencies emitted by hidden transmitting devices. It was not a magical piece of technology, but a straightforward diagnostic instrument. Back in the silent fortress of her home, she read the instruction manual cover to cover, her mind absorbing the technical specifications with the same focus she would give a legal brief. Then she began her sweep. She started in the place where she felt most vulnerable, most exposed, her study. She moved with a slow, deliberate grace, holding the detector out like a divining rod. She swept it over the bookshelves, the lamps, the heavy velvet curtains. The device remained silent, emitting only a faint, ambient hiss. She passed it over the telephone, the computer monitor, the printer. Nothing. She was beginning to feel a sliver of doubt. Perhaps she was wrong. Perhaps the paranoia they sought to instill in her was taking root. Then she approached the mantelpiece in the living room. Her gaze fell on the digital photo frame Jessica had given her. It glowed softly, displaying a perfect, happy image of Kevin and Jessica on a beach. As she brought the detector near its sleek, modern casing, the device in her hand sprang to life. A low, insistent beeping filled the quiet room, escalating in pitch and frequency as she moved closer. It was a clear, undeniable signal, an electronic scream in the silence. The frame wasn't just displaying memories it was broadcasting. It was an eye, hidden in plain sight, a Trojan horse brought into her sanctuary under the guise of love. A cold, heavy weight settled in her stomach. The feeling was not fear, but a profound and sickening sense of violation. Her private moments, her unguarded expressions, her solitude, all of it had been observed, recorded, and transmitted. Steeling herself, she continued the sweep. Room by room, she methodically searched for other breaches. The kitchen, the dining room, the guest bedrooms, all silent. Then she entered her own bedroom, her most private space. She scanned the closets, the dressing table, the antique clock on the bedside table. Silence. Finally, she moved to the small reading nook by the window, her favorite spot in the house, where she sat every evening with a book and a cup of tea. Directly above the worn leather armchair was a smoke detector. It was newer than the others in the house, a detail she had vaguely registered when Kevin had insisted on installing it a month ago, claiming her old one was outdated. As she raised the RF detector toward the white plastic disc on the ceiling, the device shrieked. The beeping was frantic, a high-pitched, piercing alarm that echoed off the walls. The signal was stronger here than it had been from the picture frame. This was not just an eye, it was an ear, positioned directly over the place she felt most at peace. She lowered her arm, the detector falling silent. She stood motionless in the center of her bedroom, the silence now feeling different, heavier, charged with the presence of an unseen observer. Her home was no longer a sanctuary. It was a sound stage, and she was the unwitting star of a show being produced by her own son. The whispers she'd been hearing weren't in the walls, they were being broadcast from them. The discovery of the bugs was a declaration of war. Martha now understood the rules of engagement had changed. This was no longer a matter of family conflict, it was a criminal conspiracy. A judge knows that solid evidence is paramount, and her simple RF detector, while a powerful tool for confirmation, was insufficient for a court of law. She needed an expert. She needed unimpeachable proof. She did not consult her usual network of legal and financial contacts. Discretion was a strategic necessity. Instead, she reached out to a former law clerk, now a partner at a boutique firm specializing in corporate espionage. After a brief, encrypted call in which she outlined a hypothetical domestic security concern, she was given a name, Kenji Tanaka. He was, her clerk assured her, the best. A ghost who specialized in finding other ghosts. Kenji Tanaka arrived 2 days later, not in a van emblazoned with a company logo, but in a nondescript sedan. He was a small, quiet man in his late 40s, his movements economical and precise. He carried a single, heavy-duty Pelican case. He did not engage in pleasantries. After a brief nod, he got to work. His equipment was a significant evolution from Martha's handheld device. He used a thermal imager to detect the minute heat signatures of active electronics, a nonlinear junction detector to find circuitry even in devices that were turned off, and a spectrum analyzer to map every radio frequency broadcasting from the house. It was the methodical, silent work of a bomb disposal expert, treating every object as a potential threat. The results were far worse than Martha had imagined. Her initial sweep had only found the loudest, most obvious transmitters. Kenji's professional-grade equipment uncovered the true extent of the invasion. He found a tiny pinhole camera embedded in the spine of a law book on the shelf directly opposite her desk, its lens perfectly positioned to capture her face and computer screen. He discovered a microphone, no larger than a grain of rice, concealed within the base of her desk lamp. Another camera was hidden in a decorative clock in the kitchen, and a voice-activated audio recorder was taped to the underside of the dining room table, where they had discussed the loan. The network was sophisticated and comprehensive, designed to capture every facet of her private life. They hadn't just bugged her, they had wired her entire existence for sound and video. "They're using a mesh network," Kenji explained, his voice a low monotone as he pointed to a diagram on his laptop. Each device acts as a relay, creating a redundant, low-power signal that's harder to detect than a single powerful broadcast. It's professional. The data is being routed through your own Wi-Fi, encrypted and uploaded. "Uploaded where?" Martha asked, her voice tight. This was Kenji's true expertise. He attached a device to her router, a small black box that began to passively intercept and analyze the outgoing data packets. For nearly an hour, he sat in silence, his eyes fixed on the cascading lines of code on his screen. "Got it," he said finally, without a trace of triumph. He turned the laptop toward her. "The data is being sent to a private cloud storage server. An account with a service called VeryCloud. The account was opened 6 weeks ago." "Under whose name?" "A pseudonym, John Smith." "But they made a mistake," Kenji said, a flicker of something like professional satisfaction in his eyes. He pointed to a line on the screen. The account was created using a burner email and a prepaid debit card to mask their identity. But they paid for the premium storage tier, more space, faster uploads. That required a recurring payment from a real financial instrument. He typed a few commands, and a new window opened, displaying the billing information linked to the premium upgrade. It was a credit card, a Platinum American Express, registered to one Jessica Vance. There it was, the digital echo, the undeniable forensic link between the invasion of her home and the smiling woman who sat at her dinner table. Jessica's name on the screen was more damning than a signed confession. It was cold, hard, and irrefutable proof. The uninvited eye had a name. "Finding the server is one thing," Kenji said, his gaze fixed on the screen. "Accessing it is another." He explained that VeryCloud used two-factor authentication. Even if he could crack the password, a confirmation code would be sent to the account owner's phone. A direct hack was risky and would alert the user. Martha considered this. "Jessica's phone number will be on the credit card application data you found." Kenji nodded. "It is, but we can't just intercept a text message." "That's not how this works." "No," Martha said, her mind already working through the legal and strategic angles. "But you can use it." She outlined a simple, elegant piece of social engineering. It was a strategy born from decades of observing human fallibility from the bench. Following Martha's instructions, Kenji initiated a password reset for the VeryCloud account. A moment later, he used a spoofing service to send a text message to Jessica's phone. The message, designed to look like a legitimate service alert from a popular social media platform, read "Unusual login attempt detected. Please reply with the 6-digit verification code you just received to secure your account." It was a classic phishing tactic. Seconds after, the legitimate VeryCloud reset code was sent to Jessica's phone. Anxious to protect her social media, she would, they hoped, Forward the very cloud code without thinking. They waited. Less than a minute later, Kenji's screen blinked with an incoming message. Jessica had taken the bait. He entered the 6-digit code. Access granted. The file system that appeared on the screen was chilling in its organization. There were 2 primary folders. The first was labeled Raw Feed. Inside, subfolders were meticulously categorized by date and location: Steadicam, LR frame, bedroom audio. Kenji clicked on one at random. An image of Martha filled the screen. It was footage from the previous day, captured by the camera in her study. She was at her desk, reading a book, her expression focused and intelligent. She turned a page, her movements fluid and deliberate. Kenji opened another file, this one audio from the bedroom. It was the sound of her sleeping peacefully, the gentle rhythm of her breathing. They watched clip after clip. Martha preparing breakfast, listening to classical music, speaking on the phone with her lawyer about a charity endowment. The footage was a comprehensive, unedited record of a woman living her life with complete and undeniable cognitive lucidity. This was the truth. Then, Kenji clicked on the second folder. It was labeled Project Nightingale. The contents of this folder were a grotesque distortion of the first. It contained dozens of short video files, each with a title like Confusion Episode 01, Memory Lapse 04, Agitation Clip 07. Kenji played the first one. The video opened with a shot of Martha in her kitchen, frowning slightly. The audio, spliced in from a different time and place, was her voice muttering. Now, where did I put it? The shot cut abruptly to her standing in the hallway, looking left and then right, a perfectly normal action now framed as disorientation. It ended with an audio clip of an exasperated sigh, recorded while she was struggling with a stubborn jar of olives. The entire clip was less than 30 seconds long, but in that time, it painted a powerful false picture of a confused and frustrated old woman. They watched another. It showed Martha pausing mid-sentence during a phone call, a natural hesitation, but the audio was manipulated, a faint, digitally. Added stammer was inserted, and the conversation on the other end was edited out, leaving her speaking to silence. A clip of her searching for a misplaced document in her study was intercut with footage of her walking aimlessly in the garden, creating the illusion of a woman lost in her own home. A moment of quiet contemplation in her reading chair was presented as a catatonic state. It was a masterpiece of malicious editing. The raw material of her competent, independent life had been systematically disassembled and reassembled into a damning narrative of decay. Every normal moment of forgetfulness, every thoughtful pause, every flicker of frustration had been isolated, amplified, and woven into a tapestry of lies. This was the evidence they were building. This was the director's cut of her life, and she was being portrayed as the tragic, incompetent protagonist. Project Nightingale was not just a folder, it was a character assassination. Watching the fabricated videos of her own decline was a profoundly disorienting experience, like seeing a stranger wearing her face. But Martha processed the emotional impact with the same detached discipline she applied to everything else. This was not about her feelings, it was about their intent. The videos were the weapon. She now needed to find the crime. Look for documents, she instructed Kenji, her voice steady. Text files, PDFs, emails, anything that isn't video or audio. Kenji navigated back to the main directory of Project Nightingale. Tucked among the video clips was a subfolder simply titled Legal. Inside were 3 password-protected PDF documents. The encryption was standard, but Kenji bypassed it in minutes. As the first document rendered on the screen, the full scope of their treachery was laid bare. It was a draft petition to the probate court. The title was stark and brutal: Petition for Appointment of a Conservator of the Person and Estate of Martha Vance. Her own name. Her life, reduced to a case file. The petitioner was listed as Kevin Vance, her son. The document alleged that Martha Vance, due to a rapidly progressing neurocognitive disorder, was no longer capable of managing her own financial affairs or making personal decisions regarding her health and welfare. It formally requested that the court grant full legal control, the conservatorship, to Kevin. Martha read the cold, legalistic prose with a sense of surreal detachment. It was a language she knew better than any other, the language of her entire professional life, now being twisted into a weapon against her. The startup, the loan, the talk of a family legacy, it had all been a lie. A complex, brilliantly executed diversion. They didn't want a piece of her fortune, they wanted all of it. They wanted to seize control of her entire estate, her home, her life's work, by having her declared legally incompetent. "Keep reading," she said, her voice a low command. The second document was an affidavit in support of the petition, signed by Jessica Vance. In it, Jessica recounted, in painstaking and sympathetic detail, a series of observed incidents that demonstrated Martha's supposed decline. The phantom lunch appointment was there, described as a moment of profound confusion and denial. The day Martha had forgotten her banking password was presented as evidence of her inability to handle basic financial tasks. Every gaslighting incident, every manufactured moment of doubt, was now codified as a sworn statement. But the most damning part was the final document, an exhibit list. It was a meticulously compiled log that correlated Jessica's anecdotal claims with specific video evidence. Each claim in the affidavit was followed by a hyperlink and a time-stamped reference to a clip from the Project Nightingale folder. See Exhibit A. A confusion episode 01 at 0:14. Subject is unable to recall location of common household items. See Exhibit C. Memory lapse 04 at 0:22. Subject displays difficulty with recent event recall during phone conversation. They had created a closed loop of manufactured evidence. The lies in the affidavit were proven by the lies in the videos, and the videos were given context by the lies in the affidavit. To a judge viewing this petition cold, without the benefit of the raw footage, the case would appear compelling, tragic, and irrefutable. It was a nearly perfect legal trap. "The lawyer," Martha said, her mind zeroing in on the final detail. "Who prepared these documents?" The metadata on the file properties provided the name a small, obscure law firm she had never heard of, one specializing in elder law. They had outsourced the final, critical step to a professional, lending their fraudulent petition a veneer of legal legitimacy. This was the gambit, the culmination of all their efforts. The illegal surveillance, the psychological manipulation, the carefully edited footage, it all led to this single, devastating objective. They planned to walk into a courtroom, her courtroom, and use a fabricated portrait of her insanity to strip her of her autonomy, her dignity, and her wealth. They hadn't just forgotten she was a judge. They had forgotten that a judge's greatest skill is not in delivering a verdict, but in seeing through the performance to find the truth. EEOT. Once Kenji had finished downloading a complete, forensically sound copy of the entire cloud server, both the truth and the lies, he packed his equipment and departed as silently as he had arrived. He left behind a single encrypted hard drive on the polished surface of Martha's desk. For a long while after he was gone, Martha sat in the profound silence of her violated home, the hard drive cool and heavy in her hand. The shock of the betrayal, in its raw and unvarnished entirety, finally hit her. This wasn't just a scheme for money. It was a complete and utter negation of her existence, of her mind, of her very identity. The son she had raised, the woman she had welcomed into her family. They had looked at her and seen not a person, but an obstacle, a problem to be managed, drugged, and ultimately erased. The grief she felt was a sharp, physical pain, a wound far deeper than the one Richard's death had left. That had been an act of nature. This was an act of malice. But Martha Vance had not presided over a courtroom for 30 years by succumbing to emotion. The grief, sharp as it was, began to cool, hardening into a resolve as cold and clear as ice. The judge in her mind took the gavel. The time for sorrow was over. The time for litigation had begun. The next morning, she made one phone call. Arthur Finch had been Richard's estate lawyer, a friend of the family for decades, and one of the sharpest legal minds Martha had ever known. He was semi-retired, but his loyalty was absolute. "Arthur," she said when he answered, "I need to see you. It's a matter of some urgency." He met her in his old corner office, a place of worn leather and the comforting scent of old books and older whiskey. She didn't offer pleasantries. She placed the encrypted hard drive on his desk between them. "I am about to present you with evidence pertaining to a conspiracy to commit fraud and illegal surveillance," she stated, her voice devoid of emotion. "The targets are myself. The perpetrators are my son and his wife." Arthur listened for over an hour without interruption, his expression shifting from warm familiarity to disbelief, and finally to a quiet, simmering rage on her behalf. Martha laid out the facts with the precision of a prosecutor delivering an opening statement: the loan, the gaslighting, the discovery of the surveillance devices, the contents of the cloud server, the draft conservatorship petition. She presented her case logically, chronologically, and without a trace of self-pity. When she finished, Arthur was silent for a long time, his steepled fingers resting against his lips. "The arrogance," he finally murmured, shaking his head. "The sheer, unmitigated arrogance to try this on you." "They have been meticulous," Martha said. "Their legal trap is well constructed. The video evidence, fraudulent as it is, will be compelling to a judge who doesn't know me." "Which is why we will never let it get to that stage," Arthur countered, his voice now hard with purpose. "We don't defend, Martha. We attack. We file first. We control the narrative. But we need more than what they've done. We need to know why." He leaned forward, his eyes sharp. "A scheme this elaborate, this high risk, it speaks of desperation. $2 million, even under your strict terms, should have been enough to launch a legitimate business if that's what they really wanted. This conservatorship gambit is a scorched earth strategy. Why burn everything to the ground? What is the accelerant?" Martha knew he was right. In a court of law, motive was everything. It provided the context for the crime. "I need you to hire someone," Arthur said, his mind already formulating the counter-offensive. "Not one of my usual corporate guys. We need someone who can dig into the dark corners of their lives without leaving a single footprint." He scribbled a name and number on a piece of his personal letterhead and pushed it across the desk. "Maria Flores. She's a private investigator. Used to be a forensic accountant. She's tenacious, discreet, and has a healthy disrespect for wealthy people who think the rules don't apply to them. Give her carte blanche. Tell her to find their financial breaking point." The strategy was forming, a multi-pronged assault. Kenji had provided the how. Now, Maria Flores would find the why. Arthur Finch would then take both and construct a legal case so airtight and so devastating that Kevin and Jessica would never see the inside of a probate court. They were assembling an arsenal, piece by meticulous piece. While Maria is digging, you have an assignment of your own, Arthur had told her before she left his office. You need to give them exactly what they want. Martha had understood immediately. You want me to play the part. I want you to give an award-winning performance, Arthur clarified, his expression grim. They are watching and recording. Every move you make is potential evidence for their case or for ours. Lull them. Make them confident. Confident people get sloppy. It was a dangerous role to assume. To intentionally inhabit the character her son and daughter-in-law had invented for her was a profound psychological challenge. It required her to weaponize her own vulnerability, to perform a caricature of senility while her mind remained as sharp as a scalpel. But she was a judge. She had spent a lifetime observing performances from the witness stand. Now, she would give one of her own. Her first opportunity came during their next Sunday visit. As they sat in the living room, surrounded by their own surveillance devices, Martha began her performance. She let her gaze drift to the digital photo frame on the mantel. "That's a lovely picture," she said, her voice softer than usual. "Of you and that young woman." Kevin and Jessica exchanged a quick, triumphant glance. "Mother, that's Jessica," Kevin said gently. "My wife." "Oh." "Of course, Jessica," Martha replied, a faint, embarrassed flush rising on her cheeks. "Forgive me, my mind is a bit foggy today." She had met Jessica's name with perfect clarity for years. The feigned lapse was a masterstroke of subtlety. Later, as they talked, she interrupted Kevin mid-sentence. "Did you ever call that roofer?" "I've been meaning to ask." "The one I told you about last week." "We talked about the roofer yesterday, Mother," Kevin said, his patience a thin veneer over his satisfaction. "Don't you remember? You said you'd already called him. Did I?" "Goodness, I can't seem to keep anything straight these days," she murmured, shaking her head as if in genuine frustration. The roofer was a complete fiction, a detail she had invented for this very moment. She was brilliant. She asked the same question about the hydrangeas twice in the space of an hour. She referred to a recent political event as if it had happened a decade ago. She fumbled with the television remote, claiming the buttons were too confusing. Each action was a carefully calibrated piece of theater, designed to be recorded and logged for Project Nightingale. She was not just playing a part, she was actively feeding their fraudulent narrative, supplying them with new clips for their collection of lies. The effect was immediate and profound. Kevin and Jessica's demeanor shifted from cautious manipulation to confident control. Their patronizing concern became more pronounced, their corrections more frequent. They began finishing her sentences, treating her not as a person, but as a problem to be managed. During one visit, Jessica arrived with a plastic pill organizer, the days of the week printed in large, bold letters. "I thought this might help, Martha," she said, her voice dripping with condescending sweetness. "Just to make sure we're taking everything at the right time. We wouldn't want any mix-ups." Martha allowed a flicker of confused gratitude to cross her face. "Why, thank you, dear. That's very helpful." They became bolder, sloppier. They began to speak more freely in front of her, lulled into believing she was no longer capable of comprehending their conversations. During one phone call, with Kevin on speakerphone in her living room, she overheard him discussing the startup with a colleague. "No, the funding is fully secured now," Head said with an arrogant laugh. "The primary investor is very compliant." Compliant? That was what she had become to them. An asset to be controlled. An object. The performance was draining. Each feigned moment of confusion was an act of profound self-control. Every time she allowed them to condescend to her, she felt a sliver of her own dignity being chipped away. But she held fast to her purpose. She was not the victim in this play. She was the director, allowing her actors to believe they were in charge while she silently arranged the scenery for the final act. She knew they were watching her through their hidden lenses, seeing a woman fading into oblivion. They had no idea she was watching them right back, with perfect, damning clarity. While Martha was giving the performance of a lifetime, Maria Flores was quietly unearthing the truth. The private investigator worked not with hidden cameras, but with the digital breadcrumbs and public records people so carelessly leave behind. She was a bloodhound following a money trail, and the scent was overwhelming. She delivered her findings to Arthur Finch in a slim, devastatingly concise report. Arthur summoned Martha to his office to review it. The portrait it painted was not of the successful, ambitious couple they projected to the world, but of two people drowning in a sea of debt and deceit. Kevin, it turned out, was a spectacular failure. His polished career in finance was a carefully constructed facade. Maria had uncovered a string of failed personal investments and two previous business ventures that had imploded, wiping out his savings and leaving him with significant liabilities. But the true bombshell was more recent. He had developed a severe online gambling problem, leveraging high-risk sports betting sites that operated in legal gray areas. The numbers were staggering. Mariah's forensic accounting traced a flow of funds that indicated he was in debt to the tune of nearly $500,000, not to a casino, but to a network of illicit private lenders who were not known for their flexible repayment plans. "This explains the urgency," Arthur said, tapping a paragraph in the report that detailed the escalating, threatening nature of the collection notices Maria had managed to uncover through a source. "He's not just in debt. He's in danger." The medical startup was never the point. It was just a plausible story to get his hands on immediate, liquid capital. If Kevin's problem was desperation, Jessica's was delusion. Mariah's investigation into her finances revealed a lifestyle funded almost entirely on credit. There were itemized statements from luxury retailers, receipts for spa treatments that cost more than a mortgage payment, and leasing agreements for a high-end sports car Kevin could in no way afford. Jessica was maintaining the illusion of immense wealth, charging tens of thousands of dollars a month across a half-dozen high-interest credit cards. Her total consumer debt was approaching $250,000, an unsustainable mountain of liabilities built on the fantasy of a life she felt she was owed. "She's living a lie," Martha observed, her voice flat. She looked at a photograph Maria had included, a paparazzi-style shot of Jessica leaving a designer boutique laden with bags, a bright, brittle smile on her face. It was the same smile she wore when visiting her mother-in-law. The report provided the final, crucial piece of the puzzle, the motive. It wasn't just greed. It was a suffocating, imminent financial collapse. Their meticulously curated life was a house of cards, and a strong gust of wind was coming. The conservatorship was not a plan for the future. It was a desperate, last-ditch effort to stave off a present-day catastrophe. Seizing control of Martha's estate was the only way to access the funds necessary to pay off Kevin's dangerous lenders and service Jessica's mountain of debt. Martha's $2 million loan, with its strict controls and milestone-based disbursements, had been useless to them for this purpose. They couldn't use it to pay off gambling debts or credit card bills without her oversight. They needed unrestricted access to the entire fortune, and they needed it immediately. "This is it," Arthur said, closing the report. "This is the accelerant. We have the means, the method, and now the motive. We have every piece of evidence we need." Martha looked out the window at the city below, her expression hard and unyielding. The pain of her son's betrayal was still there, a cold, heavy stone in her heart. But it was now overlaid with a jurist's clarity. The case was complete. The evidence was irrefutable. All that remained was to present it in a manner that would ensure the most devastating possible verdict. The time for performance and observation was over. The time for judgment had arrived. From her continued convincing portrayal of decline, Martha knew her son and his wife were growing bolder, more confident. She overheard a hushed, triumphant phone call where Jessica mentioned meeting with their lawyer next Tuesday to finalize the paperwork. That was their deadline. Martha and Arthur decided to strike the Friday before. On a quiet Friday morning, Arthur Finch, acting on behalf of his client, Martha Vance, executed a legal maneuver of devastating precision. He didn't await to be sued, he became the plaintiff. He filed a comprehensive civil lawsuit in the state superior court. The defendants were listed as Kevin Vance and Jessica Vance. The causes of action were a brutal litany of their crimes: fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, conspiracy, illegal wiretapping and electronic surveillance, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The lawsuit sought not only the immediate recall of the $2 million loan, but also substantial punitive damages. The complaint, a document of over 100 pages, was a masterpiece of legal narrative. It laid out the entire conspiracy in meticulous, damning detail, from the fraudulent startup pitch to the coordinated campaign of gaslighting. It was a story told with cold, hard facts, stripped of emotion but radiating righteous fury. The filing of this lawsuit was the opening salvo, a shot fired across the bow that Kevin and Jessica would never see coming. A process server was dispatched to their home, ensuring they would be served with the papers that evening, their weekend plans irrevocably shattered. But Arthur's strategy was two-pronged. A civil suit, however strong, could be tied up in litigation for years. Martha did not want a protracted legal battle, she wanted a swift, decisive conclusion. So, at the exact same time the civil suit was being filed, a second, even more potent action was taken. Arthur dispatched a trusted courier to the downtown office of the district attorney. The package the courier delivered was addressed to the head of the Elder Abuse Prosecution Unit, a formidable prosecutor Arthur knew by reputation. The package did not contain a letter of complaint. It contained an entire, ready-made case. Inside was a single encrypted hard drive, a perfect clone of the one Kenji Tanaka had prepared for Martha. Accompanying it was a detailed, sworn affidavit from Kenji himself, outlining the technical specifications of the surveillance network he had uncovered and validating the forensic integrity of the data he had extracted. There was a second affidavit from Maria Flores, summarizing her investigation into Kevin and Jessica's catastrophic financial situation, establishing a clear and powerful motive. The centerpiece of the package, however, was a memorandum drafted by Arthur and Martha. It was a guide for the prosecution, a legal roadmap. It cross-referenced the raw, unedited video footage of Martha's complete competence against the maliciously edited clips from Project Nightingale. It highlighted the most egregious examples of splicing and audio manipulation. It then linked those fabricated clips directly to the fraudulent claims made in the draft conservatorship petition. It was an act of profound legal audacity. They weren't just reporting a crime, they were delivering the entire prosecution, gift-wrapped and irrefutable, to the one office with the power to put Kevin and Jessica in prison. By presenting both the unedited truth and the edited lies side by side, they left no room for interpretation. They demonstrated not only that a crime had been committed, but precisely how it had been done, by whom, and for what reason. The delivery of this evidence package transformed a private family matter into a state criminal investigation. The district attorney's office now had everything it needed to secure search warrants, subpoena financial records, and bring felony charges. Kevin and Jessica were no longer just civil defendants, they were the targets of a criminal probe. Martha spent that Friday afternoon in her study, not in anxious anticipation, but in quiet solitude. She had gathered the evidence. She had assembled her legal arsenal. She had made her preemptive strike. She had taken control of the board. Now, all she had to do was wait for her opponents to realize they had been checkmated since their first illegal move. The civil lawsuit landed like a bomb. The panicked, incoherent phone call from Kevin came less than an hour after the process server left their meticulously decorated home. Through his sputtering rage and disbelief, Arthur Finch's assistant scheduled a conference. A preliminary settlement discussion, she had called it, a deliberate misdirection. The meeting was set for the following Wednesday in Arthur's largest conference room. Kevin and Jessica arrived with their lawyer, a slick, overconfident man whose expression suggested he viewed this as a simple case of family hysterics that could be resolved with a sternly worded letter and a modest financial concession. They saw Martha sitting at the far end of the long conference table, next to Arthur, and their posture visibly relaxed. She looked small and frail, her hands folded demurely in her lap. She was playing her part one last time. Their lawyer, a Mr. Davies, began with an air of patronizing authority. "Mr. Finch," he started, "my clients are frankly baffled by this aggressive and baseless lawsuit. We are, of course, prepared to fight it vigorously, but in the interest of family harmony, we believe a swift and private resolution is in everyone's best interest. Perhaps your client has had some confusion." Arthur let the insult hang in the air for a moment before he responded, his voice as cold and hard as granite. "There is no confusion, Mr. Davies, and we are not here to negotiate a settlement. We are here to present you with the facts so that you can advise your clients on the wisdom of unconditional surrender." He gestured to a large monitor on the wall. "Let's begin with the matter of illegal surveillance." The screen lit up with Kenji Tanaka's thermal imaging photos, showing the heat signatures of the hidden cameras in Martha's home. It was followed by a high-resolution image of the pinhole lens in the spine of the law book. Then, a copy of the VeriCloud invoice, with Jessica's name and credit card number circled in red, appeared on the screen. Jessica's face went white. Davis' confident smirk vanished. "As you know," Arthur continued, his tone conversational, "felony wiretapping carries a sentence of up to 5 years in this state. For each device." He moved on, his presentation as systematic as a prosecutor's closing argument. He displayed side-by-side video clips. On the left, the raw footage Martha at her desk, lucidly discussing a complex financial document on the phone. On the right, the Project Nightingale version, the same footage, but with her pauses extended, a digital stammer added, and the other side of the conversation erased, making her appear to be talking to herself. "This is what is legally referred to as the fabrication of evidence for the purpose of committing fraud," Arthur noted calmly. "Another felony. The technical term for what your clients have done is spoliation, and judges, as a rule, tend to take it very, very seriously." He brought up the draft conservatorship petition next, highlighting the sections that directly referenced the fabricated video clips as evidence. Kevin stared at the screen, his face a mask of dawning horror. He was not looking at a confused old woman, he was looking at the architect of his complete and utter destruction. "And finally," Arthur said, reaching the crescendo of his presentation, "there is the matter of intent." He looked directly at Kevin and Jessica. "While you were building your fraudulent case against my client, she was, on my advice, building a factual one against you." He pressed a button on a small remote. A crystal-clear audio recording filled the silent room. It was Jessica's voice, captured by a new, legally placed recording device Martha had activated in her own living room 2 weeks prior. "Once the conservatorship is granted," Jessica's voice said, bright and confident, "the first thing we do is liquidate the municipal bond portfolio. That will clear Kevin's books and give us enough operating capital to keep things afloat for at least a year." Kevin's voice joined in. "We'll have to sell the house, of course. It's too big for her to be in alone in her condition. We can move her into a managed care facility. Something comfortable, but not extravagant. The equity alone will solve most of our problems." The recording clicked off. The silence in the room was absolute. Mr. Davies looked as though he had been physically struck. He slowly turned to his clients, his face a mixture of fury and shock. They had not just been caught, they had been documented, in their own words, casually planning the disposal of a human life and the liquidation of her assets. Martha had not said a word. She simply sat and watched, her expression unchanging. She had provided them the stage, and they had delivered their incriminating monologue, unaware the audience included a judge, a jury, and soon, the district attorney. The drive home from Arthur's office was the first time Martha had been alone with her thoughts since the final piece of evidence had clicked into place. The conference room had been a courtroom, and the verdict had been delivered not by her, but by the damning evidence of her son's own voice. There was no elation in this victory, only the cold, stark finality of a case closed. The implosion began before they had even left the building. Their lawyer, Mr. Davies, had requested a moment alone with Arthur and had formally withdrawn as counsel, citing a fundamental conflict of interest and his client's material misrepresentations. He had walked out of the conference room without a backward glance at the two people whose lives he had just abandoned. The consequences cascaded with brutal speed. The following morning, armed with the evidence package from Arthur and a swiftly granted warrant, detectives from the district attorney's elder abuse unit arrived at Kevin and Jessica's home. The search was quiet, professional, and utterly devastating. They seized computers, phones, and financial records, the digital and paper trails that would corroborate every piece of evidence Kinsey and Maria had already uncovered. The news of a criminal investigation involving a prominent financial manager and his wife, the son of the revered Judge Vance, was a story too potent for the local news to ignore. The leak was inevitable. By Monday, Kevin's career was over. His firm, a bastion of old-money conservatism, summarily fired him, issuing a terse public statement about upholding the highest ethical standards. The illicit lenders, who cared nothing for ethics but everything for risk, saw the news reports and the freezing of his assets. Their threatening notices, which Maria had previously uncovered, were replaced by more direct, more dangerous forms of pressure. The carefully constructed facade of Kevin's life had not just cracked, it had been pulverized. Jessica's world dissolved with equal swiftness. The social circles she had so desperately cultivated evaporated overnight. Invitations were rescinded. Calls went unreturned. The luxury brands she had paraded as symbols of her status began repossession proceedings for leased items and initiated collections for her mountains of unpaid debt. The life she had, built on a foundation of credit and deception, was revealed to be an empty, hollow shell. Martha observed this from a distance, with the detached analysis of a jurist reviewing the aftermath of a sentence she had been forced to impose. Her actions now were not driven by emotion, but by the logical and necessary pursuit of justice and self-preservation. On Tuesday, she returned to Arthur's office. The first document she signed was an emergency protective order, legally barring Kevin and Jessica from her property and from any form of contact. It was a formal, legal wall erected where a relationship had once stood. The second document was more profound. It was a complete revision of her last will and testament. Arthur had drafted it according to her precise instructions. Kevin's name was expunged, every mention of him as a beneficiary or heir methodically removed. His inheritance, the fortune he had conspired to steal, was redirected. A significant portion was used to establish a charitable trust in her late husband's name, dedicated to funding legal aid for elderly victims of financial fraud. It was a final, fitting tribute to Richard's integrity, and a quiet monument to her own ordeal. The rest was allocated to other charities she had long supported. She was not just disinheriting her son, she was transforming the object of his greed into a force for good. Finally, Arthur executed the recall clause on the $2 million loan, citing material breach of contract. The funds, which had been sitting in escrow pending the first milestone, were returned to her accounts. The last financial link was severed. That evening, Martha walked through her silent house. The spaces that had been violated by hidden eyes and ears now felt different. The silence was no longer the heavy quiet of grief, but the peaceful stillness of a sanctuary reclaimed. She walked to the living room mantelpiece and unplugged the digital photo frame. she did not look at the smiling image of Kevin and Jessica that froze on the screen. She carried it to the garage and placed it in a box of things to be discarded, a final piece of fraudulent evidence being dismissed from her life. She returned to her study and sat at the great mahogany desk. Her home was secure. Her finances were her own. Her future was hers to command. The world saw a victim of a terrible betrayal, but Martha Vance knew the truth. She was the woman who had faced down a conspiracy born of greed and desperation, and she had won. She had not been rescued. She had been her own rescuer. Her sharp mind, her strategic resolve, and her unwavering refusal to be anything less than who she was had not just been her defense. They had been her ultimate, unassailable weapon. The judgment had been rendered. Martha S.'s story is a powerful reminder that justice isn't just for the courtroom. It's something we must sometimes fight for at our own kitchen tables. The deepest betrayals can force us to become our own fiercest defenders. In the end, the most important sentencing wasn't for her son, but the one she passed for herself, a final judgment to live a life free from deception, in full control of her own story. Stories like this one really make you think, and that is what we love to explore here at my channel. Martha made the final, difficult choice to completely disinherit her son and redirect his inheritance to a charity fighting elder fraud. If you were in her position, what would you have done, and why? Thank you for being part of this story with us today. We'll see you again soon. And as Martha reclaims her peace, it makes you wonder about the lawyer who was duped and what happens when a professional realizes the case he was building was based on a foundation of lies.